But I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to be here today to promote the liberal values we cherish in this country: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and freedom of assembly. Many of you are here today because of your concern for universal human rights. We all certainly want a better and brighter future for Iran that has been ruled by radical mullahs since 1979. Thankfully, the world's attention has finally begun to turn towards the mullahs' pursuit of nuclear weapons and their sponsorship of terrorist organizations. We must do everything in our power to stop their march towards nuclearization. If Iran gets the bomb, it will be a game-changing event that will have far-reaching consequences. But what can the Western world do? What can each and every one of you do in order to stop them? There are only three ways to influence such an outcome: diplomatically, economically, and militarily. Today I'm going to spend the majority of my remarks on how to engage in effective economic warfare that, if implemented expeditiously, will stop the Iranian regime in their tracks. The government of Iran is facilitating its proliferation and terrorism activities through the world's financial system, using its state-owned banks and an array of front companies and other deceptive techniques specifically designed to evade the controls of responsible financial institutions. There are currently 30 Iranian banks operating around the globe, banks that operate in the UK, France, Italy, the UAE, Russia, Dubai. Why are Iranian banks operating around the world? These banks are able to procure much-needed hard currency in order to fund illicit behavior. Many of these financial institutions have operations in the United States. Other banks that don't have U.S. operations here themselves have relationships with U.S. financial institutions and access the U.S. market. We have major leverage over these financial institutions, but we're not using it. Can you imagine if we gave those banks a choice to choose between our market and the Iranian market? None of them would choose the Iranian market over our market. I urge you to talk to your members of Congress, as this is the most powerful of ways of making Iran feel the financial pain. I can't stress this point strongly enough. Clearinghouses, those are sub-financial institutions that many of you might not have heard of, but recently it's become public that Iran has been abusing international clearinghouses to the tune of billions of dollars a year. Iran seems to be cleverly exploiting clearinghouses to circumvent U.S. sanctions. In a court decision that has received surprisingly little media coverage, a New York district judge ordered Citibank to freeze almost $2 billion of debt securities allegedly belonging to the Islamic Republic of Iran. According to U.S. judicial documents filed both in New York and California, these funds are held at Citibank in the name of Luxembourg-based clearinghouse and bank Clearstream. Citibank, along with every other U.S. financial institution, is supposed to freeze all Iranian dollar transactions with limited exceptions for certain foodstuffs, textiles, and medicines. Under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA, institutions in violation of U.S. law are subject to a fine of either $250,000 or an amount that is twice the amount of the transaction, which could make Citibank potentially liable for a penalty up to $4 billion. The U.S. government, and in particular the Treasury Department, should carry out an extensive assessment of how to prevent Iran from abusing international clearinghouses and act accordingly. Otherwise, Iran will continue to have access to hard currency, including the U.S. dollar, which undoubtedly aids and abets their illicit behavior. Now, many of you come from Iran, so you know better than most about the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC, that Imam Khomeini created after the revolution in 1979 to protect the Islamic order of the Iranian government. Since its founding, it has now evolved into a political, military, and economic powerhouse in Iran. It reportedly has close ties to the supreme leader and President Ahmadinejad himself, who came from the IRGC. The IRGC is believed to number about 125,000 members. It operates most of Iran's surface-to-air missiles. It's believed to have custody over most of all other chemical, biological, and radiological weapons. And were Iran to obtain nuclear weapons, experts believe the IRGC would operate them themselves. The IRGC has been designated by the U.S. government for its involvement in proliferating of weapons of mass destruction. It's played a major role in Iran's oil industry, in construction, and obviously Iran's military complex. It is also one of the most corrupt components of the Iranian regime. Options that we have at our disposal are as follows. First, the government should release a mapping of all high-ranking officials of the IRGC, what they do in the organization, and any contact information we have on them. This will hopefully curb their freedom movement outside of Iran, or at the very least put them on notice. We know who you are, and we can find you. Bunyads. Bunyads are the Iranian charitable trusts that dominate Iran's non-petroleum economy. Bunyads control an estimated 20 to 40% of Iran's GDP. Bunyads are tax exempt, receive major subsidies from the government, but do not have much in the way of government control. They answer only to the supreme leader of Iran. As charity organizations, they're supposed to provide social services to the poor and the needy. Iran has over 12 million people today living under the poverty line, 6 million of which are reportedly not receiving government or bunyad assistance. To name one example, one of the most popular bunyads and most prominent, the Foundation for the Oppressed and Disabled, supposedly controls 20% of the country's production of textiles, 40% of soft drinks, and 2/3 of all glass products, and a dominant share in tiles, chemicals, tires, and foodstuffs. It therefore should come as no surprise that Iranian private sector finds it difficult to compete against the bunyads. They have political connections, clout, and their major government subsidies in hand. Given this major vulnerability, it might be high time again for the United States government to publicly name and shame all the major bunyads. It also might consider designating them, thus making it illegal to make a charitable donation to any one of these organizations. This is the type of organization that should be on the FTO list. This would also have the added benefit of raising the profile of the issue with those in Europe and Asia that presently give money to these types of organizations. Let me close with this final thought. We have all the tools necessary to persuade and punish companies doing business with Iran today. If we are truly going to stop Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons, it might be prudent to use some, if not all, the bows in our quiver. Together, we can make a difference. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you all very much. The job of the National Intelligence Council, where I was the deputy for transnational threats, is to provide over-the-horizon prognostications of trends and threats to the United States' interests, whether they be domestic or overseas, with a time frame of 2 to 5 years in the future, if we can. We are the United States intelligence community's most senior body for strategic intelligence assessments, and we get a lot right. And unfortunately, most of you know that we sometimes get some things wrong too. And then one might wonder, after observing that, why sometimes the United States policy drifts in one direction or another. So with respect to Iran then, and what U.S. policy should be towards the MEK, I found that the intelligence community in the United States has known a good deal about what and who the MEK are, what Iran's capabilities and actions are. That's the third objective of statecraft. And I found that the intelligence community and U.S. policymakers have done a good job of identifying who our rival or our enemy is. It is clear that Iran is the great destabilizer in the Middle East. The MOIS works hard to make the truth hard to detect, to eliminate Iran's rivals, and to blame the MOIS's targets, such as the MEK. We have many, many rivals. There were many details to learn. The MOIS, which is active in the United States, active in Iraq, active in Lebanon, active against the MEK, active in Saudi Arabia, kept my colleagues and me busy from the moment Ayatollah Khomeini established an aggressive, expansionist revolutionary regime 30 years ago. We all know about the discrete challenges that are posed by Iran. There's the problem of the MEK, Camp Ashraf, Camp Liberty, about which we've heard so much eloquent, clear assessment and recommendations about what is the right thing to do, the Iranian nuclear program, and Syria, Iran's surrogate and conduit to Hezbollah and influence over Lebanon, and on and on. But although the shaitan is in the details, and the MOIS and the Iranian regime are aggressive and hostile to the MEK and other perceived opponents, from the larger perspective, it becomes clear that the U.S. approach to the region, to Iraq, to Iran, and towards the MEK, for too long, has been typically piecemeal, addressing the needs, or trying to, day to day, of the MEK as it shapes American interests, which is confronted by an aggressive and newly influential Iran inside Iraq now. One can argue, and it's a sad argument to make, but I think objectively it's true, that possibly the most consequential result of our invasion of Iraq and defeat of Saddam Hussein has been to expand Iran's interests to the Tigris and Euphrates River. What are Iran's strategic objectives? Regional hegemony, I would argue, and national survival, of course. Iran seeks at least to become the region's preponderant power. As a minimum, to create buffer areas of influence around Iran so as to protect the regime from what it perceives as external threat. Iran's single greatest tool to pursue these objectives is the Syrian regime. What are U.S. strategic objectives? And here I get to express them finally in my view, which I couldn't do for my whole career. Regional stability, diminishing Iran's influence as a destabilizing aggressive power, and stopping Iran's nuclear weapons program. U.S. policy must be to diminish Iran's influence in the region. The road to diminishing Iran, Tehran, runs through Damascus. By eliminating the Assad regime and seeing it replaced by a regime not so dependent on Iran for support, we would remove Iran's single greatest leverage point in the region and the world. We would seriously weaken Hezbollah and Hamas. Already, because Assad is now weakening, Hamas has begun to distance itself from its unvarying support for the Assad regime. At least it appears that Hamas is beginning to hedge its bets, lest it find itself totally on the losing side of history when that comes. Iran's influence would weaken throughout the entire region. The United States should therefore actively support the opposition in Syria so that the government that replaces Assad will no longer be a surrogate, an ally, or almost a puppet of Iran. The U.S. also must increase pressure on Iran. Sanctions against Iran's oil industry, to include restrictions on how it exports its oil, we heard far greater detail than I can give, combined with support for an Iranian opposition, and here the MEK comes to mind, would increase the pressure on the regime. A military strike against Iran's nuclear facilities would possibly defer the problem, but would not resolve it, because the problem is the nature of the regime, not the tools that it is using to exert its influence. Tactically, the field intelligence work I did for over 2 decades argues in favor of delisting the MEK from its now outdated and wrong designation as a terrorist organization. Strategically, the analytical work I did argues in favor of working with the MEK and as a means of pressuring an Iranian regime which is a destabilizing influence in the entire region. Thank you very much.
We have made great progress, yes, but look at what lies ahead. And I say it is so good now because we join these forces today and the voices of people from all different political backgrounds and stripes. The time now and everything we need to do now speaks of action to resolve a present danger that exists in Ashraf, in Iraq, and for these wonderful people who have suffered so much. And so, I'm only asking that you now do the right thing. No one today, no person in a policy-making role in America or in the world today can say they didn't know what was happening. If the worst occurs, think about this, policymakers. You cannot say, I didn't know. You do know. You can act. You must act. And stranger things have happened than this, that perhaps next year, this event could take place in a free Tehran.